Hello. My research was an exploration of housing services in Tempe, Arizona. This is an ongoing research project that I'm using for my Barrett thesis, but here's what I've got so far. So in my investigation, I wanted to find out what resources are available for the unhoused population in the city of Tempe, and what are the barriers to access, if any. So the first thing I would like to go over is a key term, which is resources. So resources can entail shelters, permanent housing, and it can also include basic needs such as water and heat relief, which is super important in Tempe where we have excessive heat during the summer. But the reason I want to highlight this word is because my understanding of what resources for the unhoused population are transformed throughout my research. So resources for people who live their entire lives in public includes public resources. So sidewalks or park benches where people live and sleep are transformed into resources for the unhoused population and should be treated as such. Further, as a researcher, I'm not only interested in how much shelter is available and how many beds are being filled, but how are people treated in the process? Do I see sensitivity and dignity in the process of connecting people to resources? And by dignity, I mean, are people working in nonprofits and working in the city, putting equal trust in unhoused people to take the next critical step to put themselves in a stable position as they work towards permanent housing together? So, what drew me to this topic was that in Tempe at any given point in time, more than 1,100 adults and children are unhoused. And this is even more true in 85281 zip code, which is where ASU is situated. I live on ASU's campus, and the reason that I share these numbers are because I believe they reflect the reality of the day-to-day life in Tempe. When I experience my life in ASU, there are unsheltered folks on every corner around the campus and throughout Tempe's downtown, which is adjacent to the campus. So this just led me to wonder, why? Are there enough resources and are they being utilized effectively? So I want to briefly look at the resources provided by the city of Tempe. So the services that I've listed here that the city of Tempe provides, this is far from an exhaustive list. These are just some of the ones that stood out to me, and the teams listed are also far from all of the people involved in helping the unhoused population of Tempe. So I'd like to draw attention to how the city benefits from stability, structure, permanent infrastructure, and having extensive resources. So for example, the Homeless Outreach Prevention Effort Team, or the HOPE team, is integrated into other services with the city, such as the mental health court. So I think the mental health court really illustrates some of the strengths and weaknesses of the city of Tempe's homeless outreach. So in the mental health court, individuals who have significant mental health challenges or disabilities can enter a contract with the city in which they work towards a more stable position, and if they successfully complete the program, they receive a certificate and the charges against them are either reduced or waived. So some of the benefits demonstrated by this program are the structure and the tangibility of having terms that must be met in a contract and then a clear outcome in this contract. And so the HOPE team's role in this contract is to help people, to help inform how people can be in a more stable position that sets the grounds for them to be in a healthier place mentally as well. But some of the challenges that are illustrated by this very program are some of the difficulties of a bureaucratic structure, which includes long wait times and lots of paperwork, and contracts themselves, which can pose a barrier to access. So there is also the difficulty of assignment to a random caseworker or attorney. And so when I observed the mental health court, some people expressed that they did not trust the people that they were working with. And this can become a barrier to access when there's a lack of trust between the people with the resources and the people who are needing the resources. So next I'm going to look at the nonprofit world, but I want to emphasize that the two are connected through partnerships. I also want to emphasize that the city of Tempe recognizes the importance of trust in connecting people to housing services. And this is one of the major goals of the outreach efforts of the HOPE team. But just the nature of the city's operations can sometimes erode trust between people and the city. So The two nonprofits that I would like to look at are AZ Hugs and the Eris Foundation, which are both Tempe-based. AZ Hugs mostly serves adults and is always working with at least one family, and the Eris Foundation serves mostly young adults and people struggling with addiction. So the narrow scope of their work being that they focus on helping unhoused people and especially on meeting their basic needs such as food, clothing, hygiene, even transportation, for example, means that they can build very personal relationships based on trust with the unhoused population. But on the other hand, nonprofits often deal with a lack of infrastructure, so they rely on public spaces to hold their events, and they rely on donations and grants for funding. So this is where some conflict emerges between the city and the nonprofit world. Namely, AZ Hugs holds their events in Tempe's public parks, and across the past 2 years, concerned citizen calls have led to the city asking them to obtain a special permit for their events. This can put a burden of cost on the nonprofit. As I mentioned, all of their funding comes from donations, but also there is an element of time that is challenging for them, namely the time for the permit to be reviewed, or the permit was denied the first time, they have to wait a year for reconsideration. But in the meantime, AZ Hugs does not want to stop their events. They want to keep helping the people who they help every day. But the city has wider ranging objectives and responsibilities, which include maintaining the public parks, which include answering to the businesses and permanent residents of Tempe. So AZ Hugs receives a weekly ticket, which again puts a significant burden of cost on them. So the issue at the core of this conflict is that there's been an erosion of trust between the nonprofit and the city, and especially between the community and the city. So in conversation with unhoused people, I've heard often that they feel the city is antagonistic, they mistrust the city, and this builds on top of mistrust that already exists, for example, with park officers or with police officers. Some of my recommendations for addressing this erosion of trust and in establishing, a new relationship and renewed trust, so that all of these resources can work together more cohesively. I believe that the city of Tempe can take advantage of the weekly outreach events that are hosted by nonprofits to maximize their impact. So for instance, the Hope Team is made up of 9 people, but there are over 1,000 unhoused people in Tempe, which means they are unable to reach every single person and they're unable to give each person personalized care. If they were to partner with nonprofits and to go to these outreach events, then they may be able to extend their impact and to streamline their resources. Secondly, I believe that the community as a whole would benefit from increased education and more informative messaging about homelessness. So specifically, I think that both the city and nonprofits can use more direct and personal language in their public messaging. So my example that I think we can look to is the city of Boston, which is considered sort of an example of very strong housing services in the United States. Though not without its flaws, something that I noticed that Boston does is on their website, when you go to their homeless services, it says if you or a person that you know is experiencing homelessness, this is a list of resources that you can look at. It's very long, it's very organized, and I believe that when a member of the public who hasn't experienced homelessness looks at this list of resources, they gain an understanding of all of the in-between steps from a person being unhoused to accessing permanent housing, which includes medical care, mental health care, food. So I think using more clear and direct messaging can help to bridge this conflict between the permanent residents of Tempe and the physical residents of Tempe who live on our streets and in our parks. And finally, I believe that the city and nonprofits can centralize and streamline their resources to maximize their outreach and their manpower. And this is the point that I have a lot of optimism for, because I believe they're already doing this important work. So for one thing, the city already has laid the groundwork for partnerships with nonprofits, and they can expand this work so that they can maximize the number of people working towards a mutual goal. I do also want to highlight a parallel situation, which is in the city of Houston. There's sort of a similar conflict where The city has their own budget for homeless outreach, which actually ran out, and then there's a nonprofit who they were ticketing for their events. And that situation also doesn't have a perfect resolution, but I think it highlights some of the benefits of nonprofits are that they work on a donation basis. They can meet people's needs without going through the slow process of budgeting or reviewing and reapproving budgets. So I think that the fact that across the nation, the gap between cities and nonprofits presents a problem for the unhoused community highlights the need for us to connect and to streamline resources more. Thank you.